Welcome to Module 2 of Climate Change, the Fight of Our Lives, from Emergency to Solutions. The title of this module is Consequences of Climate Change. Here you will meet a group of teachers, partly from World Climate School and partly from SDG's Academy of Pakistan. Each of them will introduce themselves. In the first part, we will get an overview of the global consequences, and in the second part, we will focus on the consequences for Pakistan. Now, meet my World Climate School colleague, Rob Doughnut, who will take you through the global consequences. First, he will introduce himself.
Hello, my name is Rob Doughnut. I'm a 64-year-old Dutch citizen living in Brazil, where I work on nature restoration and a plan to save the Amazon forest, which, as you know, is the largest tropical forest in the world, and its survival is crucial for the Earth's climate system. I'm also a board member of the World Climate School. In previous decades, I have been a successful entrepreneur and an adventurer after studying philosophy, and I visited over 100 countries and lived on 4 continents. I am an Earth systems thinker, and I think, based on reading thousands of documents, that this is the most consequential decade in the history of humanity. The effects of climate change, especially in countries like Pakistan and India, which I know quite well, will be severe. We are in a race to reinvent the way we live on this planet sustainably, with justice and with respect for all and for all life. Of course, we need to get out of fossil fuels as soon as possible, but that will not be enough. We will need to restore our lands and forests and rivers to health again, and design and implement new cultural models to integrate nature as the foundation of life in our thinking. Thank you for joining this course. Please learn, spread the word, and act on it as if your life depends on it, because it does. Hello everybody, and welcome to this edition of our climate change course, which has the title, The Dire Consequences of a Warming Planet. Today we will talk about these consequences as the planet is heating up due to the emission of greenhouse gases, as you know. And we will also take a look at some of the possibilities we can do to avoid the worst outcomes. My name is Rob Doughnut. I live in Brazil, where I work on forest protection, reforestation, and rewilding, and protecting wildlife. I am a member of the Extinction Rebellion, a global movement that is warning the world that we need to change very fast in order to avoid a catastrophe. I'm especially busy in the movement to save the Amazon forest, which is crucial not just for that area, but for the global climate. I will be your teacher for today. So the great issue of our time is that the planet is heating up. In this chart, you see various scenarios which the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has drawn in their reports on how the temperatures will rise on our planet. The IPCC is a panel that exists of all countries in the world and comes together regularly to discuss the situation and what to do about it. Here you see that the highest scenario, the so-called RCP 8.5, will land us at the end of this century at up to 5.4 degrees centigrade heating. And actually, there are some ways to say that you could even think that it could reach 6 degrees centigrade. And right now we are on track for the worst case scenario, which is also called the business as usual scenario, where countries simply don't take the measures to decrease their emissions, which until 2019 were actually increasing yearly still. Currently, we are at around 1.2 degrees centigrade rise, and already the effects are noticeable around the world, as you know from newspapers, and more people have seen themselves. Although we don't know for sure, we can assume that organized human civilization probably is incompatible with more than 3 degrees average rise in global temperature, which under the current circumstances is what we're easily heading for. The scenario that we hope to achieve is actually the lowest scenario here, that's the RCP 2.6. And if you look well at the chart, you see that at some point in this century, the emissions actually go below zero, which means that actually CO2 needs to be sucked out of the air. Right now, the only techniques that we have to suck CO2 out of the air are the natural ones, which is planting trees, having soil absorb carbon, and increasing vegetation. The other techniques that are being developed are not available at scale yet. The chart that you see before you gives scenarios which are possible in terms of sea level rise, which is a consequence of ice melt. We talked about the different scenarios in the previous picture, amongst with the RCP 8.5, which right now holds a possibility of above 2 meters of sea level rise this century alone, and even after that it would increase more. So you can imagine what effects that would have around the world. It is global heating that is causing these ice caps to melt, with new record melting seen all the time from the Greenland ice sheet, the Antarctic ice sheet, and the ice on the third pole. The third pole is mentioned as one of the most important areas of the world, because although it doesn't hold that much ice compared to the Greenland ice sheet and the Antarctic ice sheet, it feeds famous rivers from the Hindu Kush, the Himalayas, and the Tibetan Plateau. And every year it disgorges billions of tons of fresh water into the ocean via these rivers like the Ganges, the Indus River, the Brahmaputra, the Mekong, and the Yangtze-Kiang River. A total of 1.5 billion people are dependent on the meltwaters of the ice of the third pole. So can you imagine what would happen if these glaciers would disappear? Right now, most of those glaciers are indeed shrinking. If all the ice would melt on the Greenland ice sheet, the Antarctic ice sheet, and the third pole, there is a potential of a total of 70 meters of sea level rise in this ice, which could flood all the coastal areas in the world. We will not get that far, but there is a big threat to the coastal areas of this world, which are heavily populated. On this map, you see some of the cities mentioned which are at risk of sea level rise even this century. Actually, this map says that urban populations are at risk already by the 2050s, which is only 30 years from now. Here, only the very large cities are mentioned, like Karachi, London, and New York. And some are not mentioned, but should be there, like Tokyo. So Mumbai, Shanghai, and Jakarta are all well within the danger of getting flooded by sea level rise. And the sea level rise that they are counting on here is still the relatively conservative estimate of 1.1 meter by 2100, while as we just saw in the other chart, it's quite possible that it could be double that value by 2100. So it would be incredibly problematic for the whole world, for all the coastal lines, and hundreds of millions of people would have to move at some point, because in most cases it is impossible to protect those cities against a multi-meter sea level rise. In fact, one big city, Jakarta, is the capital of Indonesia, already is having a problem of sea level rise combined with the sinking of its own earth due to the extraction of fresh water. That the government of Indonesia has decided to move that city of 20 plus million people. So the consequences just from sea level rise alone this century are enormous. Another of the consequences of climate change is, of course, the increase of extreme weather. And in this chart, we show that that land surface temperatures actually rise much faster than ocean surface temperatures. So while we are talking right now of a temperature increase of 1.2 centigrade, for the land surfaces, we are actually looking at double that at least, and in some areas, like in the Arctic, it has already been 3 or 4 times that much. And the reason why on land the temperature rises much faster is because in ocean the extra heat is absorbed by the water. And about 90% of excess heat that is generated by climate change is absorbed by the oceans, which is protecting us right now. But heat waves and the number of hot days are increasing fast. Heat waves can burden health and emergency services and can also put a strain on the use of water, energy, and transportation. Quite often we see that electricity used during heat waves results in power shortages or even blackouts. Food and livelihood can actually also be strained when people lose their crops because of heat, or livestock. And wealthy people quite often think they can protect themselves from the heat waves and the peak heats during heat waves, but air conditioning is actually break down with an air temperature of 56 degrees centigrade and above. And those days are coming. And the moment that that happens, temperatures are there that are completely lethal. Heat-related deaths are increasing around the world, and the number of deaths from climate change-related weather events in Pakistan alone was estimated at 128,000 per year recently, which is probably an underestimation because especially heat-related deaths quite often are seen as simply vulnerable people dying and not as a direct cause of that heat. Of all the consequences of the heating of the climate are, of course, heat itself and the droughts that come with it. These are the most dangerous of all and threaten life on our planet. And crucial in that whole story is the role of water. We all know that ice cools, water cools, and water is crucial for all life, and fresh water is crucial for all life on land, be it vegetable life like trees and crops, animals and humans. Here you see how our blue planet actually is made largely of rock and with just a very tiny bit of water. The small drop of blue water, which you see over the United States here, is all the Earth's water, including the oceans. So that is all the water there is on that planet. And that hardly visible tiny bulb of water next to it is all the fresh water we have in our lakes, rivers, and glaciers. And we all know how important water is. Retaining water on land is one of the best ways to slow down heating of our environment. And later on in this lesson, we will look into it a bit more. Luckily, our wonderful planet doesn't look like a piece of rock, because that precious mineral water is everywhere over the surface, and more than 2/3 of it is ocean. And on the land, there is a lot of water in aquifers, in lakes, in rivers, and also in vegetations and other forms of life. Water is exactly what makes this rock floating through the universe a miraculous and exceptional place, teeming with life. Water is the key to many of our problems. In this chart, we see the heat effect on food production, which is how photosynthesis works over temperature ranges. We all know that plants don't grow without water. But what is lesser known is that plants stop growing above 40 degrees centigrade because that process of photosynthesis simply stops. But other limits are there as well, and high night temperatures, for instance, also stunt the growth of rice, wheat, and corn considerably. More nights over 24 degrees centigrade during the growing season decreases the harvest considerably, and extreme temperatures from 50 degrees and upwards simply kill most annual crops. So plants are threatened by both drought and by heat. At the same time, we also find that temperatures above 40 degrees centigrade hardly happen if the soils still hold moist that can evaporate, because evaporation needs a lot of energy. So a moist soil is one of the best ways to protect us against extreme heat. Another huge problem that we face right now is that we are changing the world's habitats, both on land and underwater. We have removed about half of the 6 trillion trees globally that were there before humans really starting to remove forests. This has dried out many lands. Imagine what climate change can do. 6,000 years ago, northern Africa was a place of trees, grasslands, lakes, and people. Today, it is called the Sahara, the largest desert in the world. So, just in 6,000 years, that immense place of which once had savannas teeming with life has now gone. Another aspect of the deterioration is that half of topsoil of the planet has already been lost in the last 150 years. This has mainly happened through agriculture and animal husbandry. Using chemical fertilizer is only a temporary solution that worsens the problem, and right now we see that no matter what we do, we have already come at the limit of food production through chemical fertilizer. So not just on land, but also in the sea, we are doing a lot of damage. We are overfishing the seas, depleting fish stocks around the world. Overfishing endangers ocean ecosystems and the billions of people who rely on seafood as a key source of protein. Without sustainable management, our fisheries face collapse, and we face a food crisis. An even more invisible danger is that of ocean acidification. Slowly, because of the uptake of CO2 in the waters of the ocean become more acid. And this is bad for shells and coral reefs as they dissolve because they cannot stay intact when the level of acidity of the ocean becomes worse, because the calcium that they are made of is simply dissolving. Rising levels of atmospheric carbon due to fossil fuel emissions have made our seawater more and more acidic, and this is an ongoing process. And this acidification is fraying the web of life in the seas by threatening many species that use this calcium carbonate as building material for their living structures. And these quite often are at the start or at the bottom of the food chain in the seas. So with the disappearance of all these species and the nurseries, which are the reefs, the whole web of life in the ocean becomes endangered. We humans are not reacting very well to the problems of climate change and deterioration of our habitat. It's called the shifting baseline of perception. Because things go so slow, we hardly notice the differences and we get used to it very quickly. Our grandfathers were used to large catches of large fish, but that abundance has disappeared over the decades. And now fishermen are used to smaller catches with smaller fish, and they might complain about it, but they don't really see the deterioration because it goes too slow. The same goes for landscapes, for rising temperatures, for increasing water scarcity. Humans are great to fight an acute crisis, like when a house is on fire, everybody helps to douse the fire and things are resolved pretty quickly. But we are very bad at reacting to these slow deteriorations of the quality of our lives, which is happening on a constant basis. The problem with climate change and all related challenges is that by the time we really feel the impact, we are too late to do something about it. Still, we do take a car insurance in case of an accident. So why are we not taking an insurance on the future of our lives and that of our children? A major problem that is happening right now at an incredible speed if you look in the history of time, but at a slow speed for the average human life, is the growth of our population and the species extinction which is happening right now. If you look at this chart, the world population growth through history, you see that we have reached a billion people only maybe 200 years ago. And since then, we have made it to nearly 8 billion in just a very short time. Still, the increase of population on the streets, we notice hardly because we get used to it and our cities get bigger. And at the same time, species are disappearing at an alarming rate. Already 70% of all the animals, wild animals of our planet have disappeared since the 1950s. So this explosion of human population has triggered what we now call the sixth mass extinction. The last mass extinction wiped out the dinosaurs 65 million years ago, and that was caused by an asteroid. This time we are the asteroid. As the human population grows, we consume more, destroy more habitat, kill more animals for food, release more pollution into the atmosphere, soil, and water supply, all of which increases the rate of extinction of species. Species are disappearing in up to 100 times the normal rate, and as many as 1 million species could disappear by the end of this century, leaving behind a much poorer world. Still, it doesn't have to be that way, because by protecting our planet's habitats, we can both protect species from going extinct and actually grow more and healthier food.
Scientists estimate that billions of species have lived on Earth since life began around 3.5 billion years ago. And over the course of that time, 99% of them have become extinct. But scientists say we're now losing species at the fastest rate for millions of years. So what does this mean for the planet? And what does it mean for us?
So species go extinct normally, this is a natural process, but sometimes there are periods where a lot of species go extinct at a single event, and this is what it's called a mass extinction.
Scientists have identified 5 of these events in the history of the Earth, and from what they know, in each instance, around 75% of the planet's species disappeared over millions of years.
So we expect a number of species to go extinct every few thousands of years. But currently we have evidence of a large number of species that have already gone extinct in the past few decades or hundreds of years. And this is way higher than we'd expect just by chance. The expectation now is that the current extinction will be much faster. The most important factors is habitat transformation. This is particularly important in the tropics. Climate change, species exploitation, and pollution. As soon as climate change starts interacting with this lack of habitat that we find, then that's when we're going to start seeing thousands of species going extinct. There is the intrinsic value of a species. So polar bears are quite important for us, and orangutans are quite important for us. And those species, once extinct, they'll never come back. I don't think humans are likely to go extinct in the near future. We have incredibly broad needs, and we can live anywhere, we can eat anything. It is likely that the changes that we're causing the environment will drive us to wars or drive us to human conflict, and this may lead us to extinction. There are many things that we can do. In terms of habitat transformation, for instance, we can reduce deforestation in the tropics to zero, and all of this can be done without compromising the amount of food that we produce for ourselves. So there is no debate within the scientific community whether we need to save species or produce food. We can do both. But for climate change, we're just going to have to be more frugal, we're going to have to eat less meat, fly less, and just change our lifestyle.
Part of the looming crisis here on this earth is not caused by climate change, but is increased by climate change. And that is the looming water and food crisis. Due to the combination of population increase and consumption increase, we are using vast quantities of land and irrigate those with more and more fresh water. And water use has grown at more than twice the rate of human population over the last century, which is in large part due to agriculture. And that accounts for the vast majority of water use. In a country like Pakistan, it's even more than that. It's 90% of all water use that goes into irrigation for food, for growing crops. Given that food production will need to grow by up to 70% by 2035, which is 15 years from now, to feed the growing human population and increase the use of meat around the world, how do we balance the use of water with the need to provide all this food and to create a green and sustainable world? Plant scientists are working on improving photosynthesis on different fronts, from finding crop varieties that need less water to tweaking parts of the process in order to capture more carbon dioxide and sunlight to ensure future global food security. Will it be enough? It is something we have to talk about and think about a lot. A key aspect of the global crisis triggered by climate change, overpopulation, overconsumption, and pollution is the link to financial systems. Money makes the world go around, and the global financial system is completely connected these days and based on the value of the underlying assets and future profits to give loans. But more and more of those assets are becoming doubtful. A high-rise that gets flooded due to sea level rise, or a power plant that needs to pay taxes for pollution, can become unprofitable and prices could drop, and underlying loans therefore start losing their value. Other large movements, like for instance in Indonesia, where they have decided to move the capital from Jakarta due to sea level rise and the sinking of the local terrain due to water extraction, will cost tens of billions of dollars, and just to keep things working. So do these values which are right now of these assets which are now underpinning all this money system, will they hold up? The biggest one, of course, is the question about the oil production, the fossil fuel industry in total, and everything that's connected to it, like the internal combustion engine in cars, but also coal plants. They will have to disappear if we want to have a livable planet. But a large part of the world economy is linked to these fossil fuels. And what will happen if these are become so-called stranded assets, assets you cannot use? Then the value of these assets, of these companies that drive fossil fuels, will go down. And it will be an immense drag on the financial systems, which could make it completely unstable and could actually lead to crashes. We have to realize that when we look at the climate change and all its consequences, the health of the financial global system is a key indicator to see where we are, and something that could disrupt the whole economy worldwide very fast. So now we have seen that climate change can threaten the stability of the financial system, and that doesn't necessarily have to happen in one place. It can happen at the other side of the world. The stressors can become so forceful that it's possible that a society will collapse because of too much stress. There's all kinds of stress factors that can be in play, and usually it's not just one that triggers the collapse of a society. So we see here a couple of possibilities, like hostilities between several groups in society, hostile neighbors, and the possibility of war, extreme inequality, prolonged food and water crisis, environmental disasters and extreme weather, like flooding and droughts, and society's inadequate response to these stressors. It's usually a combination of all these stressors together, which then point into make a society more fragile. The Syrian civil war is now unfortunately a classical example on how different pressures from drought and migration, combined with food prices and differences between different segments of society and brutal oppression, made that society explode, and now, almost a decade later, the country is still in a state of collapse. Climate change here worked typically as what we call a threat multiplier. For instance, because farmers lost their crops in Syria and they had to deal with the longest drought on record, a 7-year drought, and therefore they started migrating to the cities. But other effects can also give stressors. For instance, extreme heat can cause the electric grid to collapse. And all these elements can drive a society into a form of collapse, and the state doesn't hold up the structures anymore, because people lose confidence and start finding their own solutions for their problematic situation. Once this collapse takes place, there's all kinds of terrible suffering and death, usually also in the form of conflict between people, violent conflict. But societies can look at the sky and see what is coming at them, and they can actually build resilience in such a way that they can actually mitigate and adapt to these factors that are causing this stress. Maybe we are able to avoid the most tragic outcomes by taking measures and planning for a future that is much more chaotic than the current one. This is a famous cartoon about frogs being slowly boiled in a pot because they don't feel the change of the temperature in water, and therefore they can't decide what to do. And it's not really a true story, actually, because frogs actually jump out of the pan at some point. And but with humans, it's actually more complicated, because it seems that we can't get our act together planning for a future, understanding what is coming at us in terms of challenge, and take measures fast enough to counter these challenges. So it is very important that a society actually get their act together and start planning for a more chaotic and heating future. Let's hope that humans are as smart as frogs, or even smarter. Humanity has been slowly coming to the realization that we need to do something against all the stressors that put pressure on our planet and on us as a species. And over the last 4 decades, we have made several agreements to slow down the destruction of our planet, which is caused by overpopulation, overconsumption, the destruction of nature, and the effects of pollution on air, water, and on land, including climate change. But while small successes have been made, overall the situation is still rapidly getting worse despite all of these attempts. The combination of all crises are what we call a super wicked problem. A super wicked problem is a very complex problem. It's difficult to fully understand. Solutions are quite often slow and go in various directions. And those solutions quite often create new problems. For instance, phasing out fossil fuels to get emission of CO2 down is absolutely necessary, but almost impossible to do fast enough without collapsing the world economy. And it asks wealthy nations and people to reduce their carbon footprint, which means they have to reduce their economies and their economic activities. And that's a tall order. Several large conferences and treaties have been negotiated over the decades now, the oldest being the Kyoto Protocol from 1992, where nations decided to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, but with hardly any effect. Only the European countries actually did quite something, but still not enough to reduce their emissions. A year later, the Convention on Biological Diversity tried to protect nature, again with little effect so far. The destruction of forests, for instance, has gone on unmitigated, although for a while Brazil, one of the most forest-rich countries in the world, has been able to subdue its destruction, but now it's on the rise again. In 2012, the Sustainable Development Goals were formulated, a combination of 17 goals that together would work for a more just and sustainable future. These goals are slowly showing some impact around the world, especially in countries in Africa and Asia. And in 2015, at the COP21 conference in Paris, the so-called Paris Agreement on Climate Change was unanimously adopted to cut back global greenhouse gases, to keep global warming below 2 degrees centigrade and preferably maximum to 1.5 degrees centigrade. This would happen through voluntary national climate plans. Actually, Pakistan is an example of a country that has been really taking up the challenge and is ahead of planning to get things done. And also in other countries, the Paris Agreement is getting some traction, but the changes are way too slow to reach its goals, and especially the biggest polluters need to step up their ambitions a lot if we want to have any chance of success. Again, we need to point here for a greenhouse gas emission, especially to the United States, to China, to India, to Indonesia, and to Russia, who need to step up a lot to do something about this horrible situation. On a lighter note, here is a fun cartoon again. What if it's a hoax, a big hoax, and we create a better world for nothing? Which of course is a ridiculous statement. And what we have seen is that there have been a lot of attempts to create confusion. And also, because it's such a super wicked, complex problem, quite often people do not understand, because the relation between their actions and the final results are very difficult to understand indeed. But anyway, I think it would be great if we all get our act together and create that better world, which is definitely necessary. So what is really necessary is a revolution of how we as a species, as humanity, live. We need a great turnaround, and that turnaround has many aspects. A lot needs to happen, but what does it mean in practice? We of course need to cut fossil fuels as fast as possible. We need a water revolution, a food revolution, an energy revolution. We need to restore nature and our landscapes, create climate-smart cities and climate-smart rural communities. Of course, we need also a revolution in renewable energies. But most of all, we need a revolution of ourselves. We need to realize that we are all in this together, and together we will swim, or together we will sink. So let's start at the top of the list, cutting the burning of fossil fuels as soon as possible. Easier said than done. As you can see in this chart, emissions have skyrocketed since the signing of the Kyoto Protocol, and they've gone up from 22 gigatons of CO2 per year to 37 gigatons in 2019. While other stronger greenhouse gases like methane and nitrooxygen have gone up strong as well. This means we are fast approaching the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere that could easily breach the 2 degrees warming limit. If nothing changes, we will race past that limit before this decade is out. Again, especially the US, China, India, Indonesia, and Russia need to step up and do their part, and the richest 10% of global citizens must change their footprint. These people are responsible for half of all emissions. A second aspect is very important, and we need a water revolution, especially in the arid countries. While the world is trying to cut down greenhouse gas emissions, meanwhile, we need to prepare for more heat, more droughts, and more floods, because they're coming. Key to the resilience of societies is that water revolution. As water is cooling and vital for all life, it is crucial for food security. And actually there is enough water in most places, just not enough water management. which means that we need to start managing water at all stages of the water cycle with top priorities of better irrigation management for crops, water catchment and storage, increasing soil moisture and increasing vegetation, especially trees. But many more things can be done. You simply can understand that wetting the land actually cools the land. So this is a simple notion you need to keep in your mind when you think about solutions for the future. Yes, and we will need more revolutions, especially a food revolution. There are many aspects to this particular important point as well. And we can only scratch the surface here, and all changes are strongly interlinked with the water cycle. And you can understand that the food revolution is closely connected to water revolution. But the points above that we see in this slide are some of the most important elements. So we need to change our agriculture system. We need to change our diets. We need to reward our farmers to take care of our food and also to do that in a sustainable way. Very important is we need to eat less meat and dairy because they have a large impact both on the water cycle and on emissions. Maybe we can go to more fish and fish farming on land. Also some more and more food production in urban situations, including possibly high-rise farming. We need to create more local food markets because right now food is transported over too long a distance, which costs a lot of fossil fuels. We can actually do carbon negative farming, which means that we can draw down CO2 and put it in the soil, which then actually helps fight climate change, but also increases the sponge-like nature of soil to hold more moisture. The scientists are busy with variations of varieties of crops that are more drought resistant and heat resistant and salt resistant. One of the things that we certainly need to do is reduce food waste. What we really need to realize is that if we want to have a transition to a sustainable economic future, little of the current food production methods will survive this crucial change. Well, on this chart you simply see a list of food products and the amount of water that is necessary to produce them, and you see that beef and sheep meat are at the top of the list, much more, like 4 times more than chicken. And you see that the vegetarian foods actually need a lot less input of water. So changing the diet from meat to more vegetarian elements is one of the best ways to go about it. Another revolution that is necessary is and well underway is the renewable energy revolution. We know them mainly as hydroelectricity, solar panels, solar electricity, and windmills, of course, but there are other forms as well. And actually we have to step up the plate here again because it's not going fast enough. You can see here in the World Energy Outlook of 2019 that only a very small percentage of total energy production is renewable. So we're definitely running out of time, and I think it's impossible to avoid nuclear energy if we want to the transition to succeed. We also need to demand that the top 20% users need to reduce their energy footprint drastically. And we need to get as energy efficient as possible in order to make this happen. Another aspect of the great change that we need to go through is actually one that I'm sure most people will love to be involved in. in. That's the reforestation reforestation around the world, the restoration of forests, and actually we're talking about a complete landscape restoration. Quite often people talk about reforestation, but actually we need to understand that we have to work at complete landscape restoration, which is a planned process that aims to bring back an ecological balance, increase the quality of life of people and animals living in that area, including opportunities for wild animals and birds to live well. Deforested areas are dried out and actually make climate change worse. And there are many abandoned lands that once had forests, then were used for agriculture, and then basically abandoned because they couldn't do anything anymore. They wouldn't produce. They need to be revived. Natural water storage needs to be improved, and with water storage we should not just think about storing water in tanks. We can also restore river bands, we can restore marshes, we can restore aquifers, and we can restore vegetation, and vegetation holds a lot of moisture both in its foliage, in its woods, and in its root system, and it also keeps soil more moist. And if we improve these landscapes, we will see that it, from a perspective of food production, but also on daily lives, people will actually see that their lives become much better. Another huge area of change is that we have to get to climate smart cities. Over the world, more than half the population now lives in cities. So the quality of life in cities, with all the changes that are coming, is of crucial importance. And cities will become hotter, and they have huge challenges to provide its citizens with water, food, energy, transport, and protect them from increasing effects of climate change, such as floods and extreme temperatures. And there's a lot of things that we can do. In this picture, we can see that on a hot day in a square somewhere in Sydney, in Australia, temperature differences are enormous, ranging from 24 degrees centigrade under a tree up to 40 degrees next to a metal sheet of a building. It is a simple example on how much we can do to adapt to the effects of climate change. And actually, the possibilities are enormous. Another one I always like to mention is that if you simply paint your roof white, the difference in the house could be as much as 5 degrees centigrade on a sunny day. Here we have an example of a plan, in this case, for the city of Malang in Java, Indonesia, where they're trying to get back the heat map to the 2003 situation through a combination of measures, including greening, more water, water catchment of roofs, less motorized transport. Other things that help, for instance, are e-government, which means that people have to stand less in line waiting for services from the government, but also e-banking, etc. Safe bicycle lanes are important, and also the structure of the economy of local neighborhoods, where if mosques, schools, and shops are all at walking distance, you see that the number of the amount of transport goes down. So you need less vehicles, and actually people gain they gain in wellness, and actually they save money getting all this done. So we need to look at the design and function of every element to make a city more climate resilient. In Chennai, in India, rooftop water harvesting has improved the city's freshwater situation considerably, and even diminished flooding. It is now mandatory for every building to have water catchment. So there are so many possibilities of improving the city, both from a standpoint of climate change, but also from a general perspective of the quality of life, that the list is endless, but it's a great challenge to do so. As much as we need climate smart cities, we also need climate smart rural communities. Very important again here is what is done with water management. Actually, most water is used in rural areas for crops. And it's very important for a country to have food security. So supporting our farmers to become climate smart is extremely important. And rural areas play an important role with respect to climate change. On the one hand, climate change is already impacting rural areas through droughts and heat waves, torrential rainfalls and subsequent floods that quite often damage crops. And on the other hand, rural areas have the potential to provide services that can relieve the pressure of climate change, especially managing the water cycle, water storage, carbon storage in soil and in vegetation. And in order to do so, rural areas have to adapt to this changing environment to mitigate pressures and capitalize on opportunities. And it is society as a whole that has to understand that these people are very crucial to the survival of our societies, and they need support, including getting the right prices for sustainable crops. So these were all outward revolutions and changes that we need to make. But the most important ones and the most difficult one maybe is the revolution of ourselves. It's a revolution of the mind and the heart. It's a revolution of us as a society to become more caring, sharing, and thinking about the future of humans, and also appreciate the beauty of all animals and plants we share this beautiful planet with. But no worries, the vast majority of people are decent, caring human beings already. And we have the solutions, we have the designs, we have the plans. And if we bring out the best in all of us, we have a real chance of creating a better world. What happier challenge could there be than to avoid disaster and creating a more beautiful world? During this course, we will go more and more into detail on the several aspects of what needs to change. But for now, I'd like you just to have the idea of a donut. A sustainable economy is a donut. What does it mean? It means that we have to get within the boundaries of our ecological ceiling that the planet allows us. And at the same time, we also need to have all people participate in society in such a way that their basic needs are met. So I'd love you to Google a bit on what sustainable economy as a donut is. Doughnut Economics is going to be very important in the future. So we're coming to the end of this lesson, and I think the most important takeaway is that a lot needs to change. And in order to change a lot, we need everyone to do their part. Nature does not negotiate, and we need to listen to her demands, because if we don't, she will change life for us in ways that are not very good for future society, for future generations. We are at a crossroads, and life has to change in the coming decade more than ever before, and we have to do it all together, whether it's an energy revolution, a water revolution, a food revolution, but especially a revolution of the mind and the heart. We need to create a society that's more in sync with nature, that understands planetary boundaries, and that is more caring for all forms of life. Thank you for joining the army of changemakers. It will give you great purpose to your life to join us. Thank you very much.
This was the end of part 1, the global consequences, And now we continue with the second part, the consequences for Pakistan. They will be presented to you by a team of teachers from SDGs Academy, Pakistan. First out among these is Humaira Iqbal, who will talk about drought.
I'm Humaira Iqbal. I'm working as project manager in Dairy Beef and Small Ruminants project in the University of Veterinary and Animal Sciences, Lahore. These projects are supported by Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research. I am first livestock researcher who went to Antarctica along with 112 women in science across the world through Homeward Bound project. Today, our course will be about our climate change risk, which is drought. This is our topic of today description, like climate change risks. Hard hit by drought in Pakistan. There are different types of drought. We need to understand that what does those means. The drought is most costly natural disaster that can lead to widespread impacts, including water and food crisis. I will describe different types of those droughts which I am describing. Meteorological drought, hydrological drought, agricultural drought, and I will describe two other droughts at the end. The meteorological drought is generally defined by comparing the rainfall in a particular place at a particular time. This drought happens when the actual rainfall in an area is significantly less than the climatological mean of that area. Meteorological drought leads to soil moisture, and this always has an impact on crop production. The second is hydrological drought is associated with the effect of low rainfall on water level in reservoirs, rivers, and lakes. This type of drought are noticed sometime after a meteorological drought. A hydrological drought change in water level affect the whole ecosystem. The agricultural drought, which is third type of drought, is agricultural drought occur when there is not enough water for a crop to grow at the particular time. This type of drought doesn't depend only in the amount of rainfall, where water is used carelessly for irrigation and other purposes. The fourth type of drought is food water supply doesn't meet the demand due to lack of water. And the ecological drought is lack of precipitation, native plants, and animals. The hazard profile for all of these droughts is slow onset, prolonged duration, and widespread. The characteristics of drought are semi-arid areas are more prone to drought, while the severity of drought is intensified by overcropping, overgrazing, and deforestation. The rapid population of growth have a direct impact on size and magnitude of drought. The major drought occur in 12 to 16 year cycle and lesser version in 4 to 6 years. The drought may result in secondary natural hazards like dust storms, malnutrition related diseases, and wildfires. There are certain damages which are resulted due to drought, like direct and indirect damage to the household and livelihood of the people. The direct loss is income, social dislocation, you can see in the picture as well, famine, malnutrition, and ultimately death. The indirect loss is rural and urban revenues, fire hazards, loss of water access. Drought-prone regions in Pakistan are Thar Desert, Gir Thar Range in Sindh, rangelands of Balochistan, Cholistan Desert, Thal Desert. I will share a few findings of 1999 to 2001 study, like the affected people in that period of time are 3 million who are affected by the climate change, and 2.5 million livestock actually lost due to this. 58 districts seriously affected, or which 23 were from Balochistan. So you can imagine that how this drought actually impact the livelihood of livestock. and the people. How to mitigate drought? There are different measures we need to consider. One is structural measures, which are appropriate to grow appropriate crops. We need to launch dams and engineering and sport engineering projects. And the non-structural measures are policies, awareness, knowledge development, public commitment, and operating practices undertaken to limit the adverse impact of drought. There are a few recommendations we need to consider at the end of today's session, like Pakistan dams water storage capacity is much less than the neighboring countries like India. Therefore, it is need to build large and small dams in catchment areas, especially the rainfall water during monsoon period. As you observed in 2020, the severity of this monsoon, and you can see the water is not being saved, or there is not a proper planning. So the second is manage the floods and storage of the water so that we can reserve that water for crop irrigation. Thank you. This today's topic is ended now, and we will start our next topic soon. Thank you.
Next theme is sea level rise, and that will be brought to you by Nicola Tsiolis.
Hello everybody, I'm Nicola Cholis, I'm 18 and I'm from Australia, and I'll be talking to you about some of the modules that are a part of the SDGs Academy. So the first module that we have is based on climate change and the consequences of a warming planet. So after this module, you should understand what sea level rise is, what it is, how it happens, the consequences of it, and some learning strategies taking place for adaptation. So as you can see, and as you might understand, sea level rise is the result of ice melting and thermal expansion, which is related to global warming. Anthropogenic practices or activities such as the burning of fossil fuels, clearing of forested land, are just some of the causes of global warming. And you can understand with fossil fuels, there's obviously more than one. We have oil, gas, coal, there's lots of others. And as we dig them up out of the ground, or as we go find them in the ocean, specifically with oil, and we take them out of where they were originally and have been for thousands of years, there's going to be some consequences to that. And burning them for energy as we do, there's going to be even more consequences to that. So removing this significant carbon sink, which is exactly what that is, as it traps carbon within it, this process will be unable to continue at the same rate. Alongside the lack of carbon storage, such as trees, plants, the increase of releasing heat-trapping greenhouse gases, such as carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, there's other greenhouse gases, into our atmosphere increases the heat in our atmosphere. So you can understand that once we're releasing this heat from the fossil fuels that we've dug up or that we've sourced from the earth, and the heat that it's being released from them, and all the gases that's being released from them, when we burn them for energy, there's going to be some negative effects to that. Although we do get a lot of our energy off these fossil fuels, it's really not the best way to be sustainable in getting our energy. So some of the consequences of this. As a human civilization, most of where we live is along the coasts. More than 600 million people, around 10% of the world's population, live in coastal areas that are less than 10 meters above sea level. Now that is quite low. Between land and ocean, around 40% of the population, which is about 2.4 billion people, live within 100 kilometers of the ocean. So By nature, we are really drawn to the shores. Yet so many countries around the world, the idea of rising sea levels affecting people seems so distant and not in their lifetime. However, this is quite untrue. Oceans and coastal marine resources are very important for people living in coastal communities, who represent 37% of the global population in 2017. And as was said before, we see a trend that lots of people around the world just don't see the effects of sea level rise specifically, because maybe they're quite far away from the coast and that doesn't really affect them. But 37% of people, as said, are reliant on coastal ecosystems and reliant on either they work there, they live there, they source their food primarily off coastal ecosystems. That is a lot of our population, and to not delve into the consequences and the needed solutions of a rising sea level is really quite irresponsible, you could say. Consequences that continued. These are case studies, so a few examples. Tuvalu is an island nation, and the effects of sea level rise is very real and very confronting for Tuvalu. They're a small Pacific island nation between Australia and Hawaii, and they have about nine or so islands, and they're one of the smallest countries in the world. Now, the average height of Tuvalu is 5 meters above sea level, and between January and March, they have seasonal king tides, which cause severe flooding. Not only does it cause severe flooding to their mainland, but it actually seeps through the groundwater below and causes farmland and drinking wells to be inundated by salt water, which is now unfit for use. Once your drinking well, your primary source of water has been inundated with salt water, and you live on an island nation, so it's not very developed in that sense. There's not a lot of technology, and there's not a lot of access to sources that can provide adequate and sustainable essentials such as water, such as food. If that was your primary source of something so important, water, and this is happening every year between January and March and even more, this is a real disaster, you could say, for this island nation. So measures have to be put in place to reduce that, and measures have to be put in place to adapt to these sort of things. Now, evacuating and leaving the island is one thing that a lot of people are doing in Tuvalu. Because of the drastic effects that sea level rise is having on Tuvalu, a lot of the younger generation especially have been leaving and trying to find a different place to live. Even though this is their home for many people, it's just not a sustainable place to be living if you're being inundated by such simple things such as being inundated by salt water in your drinking wells. So leaving the island seems the best options for survival for these people, and that's exactly what it is. So we can say sea level rise and we can say all these different things, but in the end it's about survival. And if people are being affected to such an extent, and there's obviously way more effects that this is having on Tuvalu and having on other countries, but we're not just talking about environmental damage, we're talking about survival of the human people and survival of culture and survival of our country and survival of our biodiversity of our planet. So specifically in Pakistan, waters in Karachi have risen 10 centimeters in the last century. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're on the very coast and so I guess moving on to, so in Pakistan alone, waters in Karachi have risen 10 centimeters in the last century. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but if your livelihood relies on fishing industries or relies on the coast, or there have been structures being built along Karachi coast, this can have detrimental impact. And the other effects sea level rise is having on Pakistan is major flooding and engulfing of fertile farmland. This means the livelihoods of people along the Pakistan coast have to change. Many rice farmers around the area have had to switch to fishing to survive. So as you can understand, and as mentioned with Tuvalu, it's about surviving. And these people who have these people in these communities who have their livelihoods dependent on the coast will feel the effects much, much, much more drastically. And people have to switch and adapt their working and their location and just the way that they live their lives. Now, there are some strategies put in place for adaptation, and we're going to discuss that. So firstly, the rise of sea levels and increase of glacial and ice retreat has also got some benefits. We need to keep that in mind. In Greenland, for example, land that was originally covered by ice for thousands of years is now luscious grassland, which is now used for agriculture. This is providing Greenland with more economic diversity. Now, there are obviously consequences that come with that. Obviously, agriculture in itself has many, many pros and cons, but we won't go into that too much now. However, we have to keep in mind that countries are benefiting from this, but real projected pattern is that a lot of us, almost all of us, are struggling in some way, and that might be different ways, but this is a global crisis, and we have to understand that although we may not see the adverse effects, the effects are happening around the world, and people are losing their lives and their livelihoods from this environmental crisis. So Tuvalu has developed a national adaptation program of action called NAPA, and this has allowed local people and leaders in Tuvalu to respond with strategies to lessen the stresses of rising sea levels and all that comes with it, and to the people of Tuvalu's livelihoods. So, for example, planting mangroves along the shore is actually combating the island eroding into the sea. Now, planting mangroves might not seem the most justifiable and drastic change to combat the island basically, eroding into the sea, but mangroves are absolutely necessary in adapting. Mangroves are very, very diverse and very important plants that not only stop erosion but can build their own ecosystem. And you can see that from many, many different places around the world, just how important mangroves are. So Tuvalu introducing this as just one of their strategies is a really important and really measurable plan of action.
In the following two slideshows, Sadia Khalid from SDGs Academy Pakistan will take you through first the possible food and water crisis in Pakistan, and second, what can and should be done in order to mitigate it.
Hello everyone, this is Sadia Khalid, trainer for the World Climate School and SDG Academy Pakistan social media and Lahore coordinator. We have started an exclusive teacher education program for tackling the climate crisis in Pakistan. And I will be talking about the possible food and water crisis and its future implications and need of mass education for tackling this crisis and the youth engagement in our programs. So this is the module 2 and we will talk one by one about the water and the food crisis. What is it and how Pakistan is facing it and what are the future implications for it. So water crisis in Pakistan, what it is. So all the scientists and experts has predicted that Pakistan could run dry by 2025 as the water shortages is reaching at the alarming level and it is a threat to our country's stability and sustainability because we everyone knows that water is our life and we could not survive without the water. So it is a common perception in Pakistan that the crisis we are facing is due to the shortages of the water. It is not like that. Our country is blessed with so many water resources. That is the glaciers and the fresh lakes, and these are the source of the fresh water. But still, there is a problem in the water management and the government policies. And other problem or the issue we are facing for the shortage of water is the prolonged droughts, and that is beyond the control of man. And it is due to the lack of the rainy season, or the water management issues. So we have many rivers in Pakistan, and Indus is the largest river of Pakistan, and its annual flow is about 41.67 milliacre per feet, and basically it's 97% of the Indus water is used in the agriculture, and other 3% is used for the domestic and industrial purposes. So out of 141 milliacre per feet, around 106 MAF is annually diverted to the aggregation lines. And we all know that the Indus River has a very effective system of irrigation, canal system that is used for the agriculture purposes, and remaining 36 percent goes to the sea. Of course, that is a total loss and it is unused because we could not use the sea water for the drinking or the agriculture purposes. So we need a proper application for the irrigation system so that the 66% of water that is using should not go waste. And we should increase our other irrigation sources of water so that our agriculture sector do not get affected by it. And due to the average rainfall that it is sometimes it is very high rainfall season and sometimes it is low, it is also affecting the crisis in Pakistan. So, in one of the problem of the water crisis is our increasing population. Of course, in 1947 or before the 1960, our population is only 45 millions, but now it reached up to more than 200 million. Of course, as the population increases, the use for the drinking water and the use for the agriculture and other uses become high, and that could create the crisis in the water. And in 2010, we have only 24 glacier lakes, but now we have 3,000 lakes them, and that is a very good sign for Pakistan. But still, due to the poor water management, we could not manage the glacier lakes or the rainfall rate, or we cannot store them. So again, it is predicted that 2025 Pakistan could run dry, or and that is a very alarming situation for us. So impact on the agriculture sector, of course, all our agriculture sector is based on the water. So agriculture is our backbone. Of course, Pakistan is one of the agricultural countries, and our GDP and our economy is based on our agriculture. So we are facing many problems economically and as well as socially, because of course there is a mental block, and there is a tension increases in the people and among the government, that if we run out dry, what will we do? And now Pakistan has already facing rupees 90 billion losses due to the drought and low rainfall season. And of course, if our agricultural activities will not boost up, our economy will be crippled, and it will have a very bad impact on it. And 35% agriculture activities are boosting our GNP, and of course, it is employing almost 44% of the population, and 65% of our export earning is due to the agricultural sector. So we should think very seriously about it. So diverse effect on the water shortage on agriculture. Again, agriculture is our main cause of boosting the economic activities, and our 9.7 GDP is based on it, and it is affected due to the shortage of the water. And orchids of Pakistan bring home a healthy amount of forest exchange, as our mangoes and our oranges and our other crops are very famous among the foreign countries. And if we could not produce it in the ample amount, then it will cause a very great loss to our economy. So now we have to save water, because this is in our hand, and we have to work together that we should do something for it. So now we will talk about the food crisis in Pakistan. Again, the water shortages and the water crisis in is giving the birth to the food crisis. If our agricultural activities will not boost up, and it will not meet our criteria for the food production, of course, it will create a food crisis. And basically, we need to empower every nation around the globe to grow their own food, because growing your own food is more sustainable than borrowing from others, and it will always a burden on our import. So we should solve the food insecurity that will always remain a great issue. So despite the food surplus, Pakistan experiences big level of food insecurity. And of course, our poor could not afford it. And this is causing the poverty and inflation. Both are creating the food crisis in Pakistan, and it will generating the food crisis. Of course, Pakistan is one of the developing countries, and we have um, got the serious hunger level, and we are also in the countries which food security is not effective. And according to a report, 40% of food in Pakistan is wasted, and almost 36 million tons of water food is wasted in Pakistan every year, and that is very much alarming, because half of the population is living in a very crucial circumstances, and they are facing the economic deficiency. So state of food security in Pakistan. So Pakistan is a lower middle income countries, and we are among the sixth most populous country in the world. And it is not only the food crisis. Our half of the population is also facing the malnutrition, especially the mothers and the young children. And 60% of the country faces food insecurity. And of course, many poor families could not afford an adequate diet for their women or for their children. So Pakistan, hunger and malnutrition, again, this is the problem of the food crisis, and Pakistan has some of the highest malnutrition rates in Pakistan in the world, and even UNICEF has also indicated that uh, our status is very poor among the world, and we need to have a proper, effective policies in which this situation could be improved. And current estimate that 61.9% of young children and now 50% of women are means they have the blood deficiency, and 54% of children and 46% of women suffer from the vitamin A deficiency, and 40% of the Pakistani women are also zinc deficient, much higher than the global average of 70%. And our vitamin D deficiency is also very much common among our population. So I guess the government should take very effective policies to solve this matter. So what are the key pressures on our food security? Although food production has increased in Pakistan, and even we are also exporting some food, but still we need the agriculture productivity and livestock production. And food availability is not the main food security issue. Basically, food availability, we have the food availability, but our as our most of the population is living under the very poor economic condition, that is why they could not afford the appropriate diet for their families, and thus Pakistani household expenditure on food has risen very rapidly, and our daily consumption of calories and fallen in the same period. So in the 2002, the average calories for the each household has also rise low. So this is a very alarming situation. So then wheat crisis. Right now we are facing inflation, and many people criticize that this is due to the poor government policies and other factors. But still, wheat crisis is always a problem because in Pakistan we use wheat more than any other crop. And this is the problem because the government has always given the wheat farmers um, advantage when they bought their crop from the farmer. So that's why always our wheat prices are higher than other crops, and this is creating problem for the poor economic families. They could not afford wheat and other crops, and thus they are also facing the hunger and malnutrition issues. So, what are the food and environmental crises? Of course, when the food crisis rises above, so it will also create the environmental crisis in Pakistan. So, our Pakistan environment is also vulnerable to the food insecurity. We are the 16 most vulnerable countries in terms of the climate change, and we are facing different kind of risk: air pollution, noise pollution, melting glaciers, sea rise, landslide, flood, droughts, and our coastal areas are more prone to the twisters and cyclones, and floods and the monsoon season become a risk in the Punjab and the Sindh countries, and even our major cities come under the flood during that time. Natural disasters also increasing over the past 10 years, and that's why we are very much vulnerable to the environmental crisis. And of course, this is one of the cause. When the flood came, all the crops are under the water, and this create the food crisis. And if they are the natural disasters that also have a very bad impact on our agricultural activities, and thus producing the worst dry seasons in the countries, and it is affecting our agricultural sector. So these are the issues we are talking about, and this is all for this module. Everyone, this is Sadia Khalid, trainer for World Climate School and STG Academy Pakistan, Lahore, and social media coordinator. And now we will discuss about the module 2B, future of food and water crisis in Pakistan. So yes, this is a reality that water crisis is growing issue in Pakistan, and we could run dry by 2025 if our government and we do not start thinking about it or start doing something about it. So, what is the future of water crisis in Pakistan? Yes, water is one of the major problem or major challenges our government is facing right now. And in the past some years, we declared as a water abandoned country, but now we are experiencing the crisis or water stress, and this is due to the incapability of managing the resources well. So in 1990 and 2015, our per capita water availability has declined from 217 cubic meters to 1306 cubic meters per person, and we almost extract 75% of fresh water annually, but now it is decreasing day by day. And as the population increases, this is creating problem for water sanitation or fresh water availability, and half of the population, around about 27.2 million Pakistanis, do not have access to safe water, and 52.7 million people do not have access to the proper or appropriate sanitation facilities in Pakistan. So our health rate is much decreasing. Our malnutrition and health issues are increasing day by day. Around about 39,000 or 40,000 children die every year by the diarrhea due to the poor water quality. So this is much alarming, and we should start emphasis on the water quality or the water taste, because of course it is directly affecting our health. So basically, why this water crisis is becoming so severe in our country? Because of the rapid population, rapid agricultural activities, intensive farming practices, industrialization, and all this agriculture and industrial revolution or industrial sector are not giving attention to the water sustainability in Pakistan. They are just using and wasting it. So our supply side is hampered by, and then the climate crisis, that lack of the rains or drought seasons and leading to flood, and flood water is directly going into the seed, and that gets simply unused. And of course, due to the climate crisis, our groundwater level is decreasing day by day. So we do not have the underground water that could be a very fresh source of water, and our household waste being dumped in water courses. Of course, that waste management is also becoming a major problem in Pakistan. That is basically give a hurdle for the fresh water supply. So, what government should do, and what and how we can make Pakistan better? So, government should make dams. And then there should be a mass awareness campaigns that people should realize that what is the importance of the water and how could we use the water wisely. And highland should be helped in the water crisis. It should be the highland. We should make people aware that the importance of the water campaign, and we should emphasize, especially at the school levels or the colleges level, children should be aware, and they should aware the communities, their parents, their families, that we should not waste the water. So we should and if we start restoring the water, we should start protecting the water resources, and we should start working on the water sustainability. It could lead to the survival of our coming generations. So, in the previous year, federal and government, provincial level governments are doing a lot of uh, conferences, sessions, and even the practical step to store or to sustain our water resources. And even our national climate change policy is also giving the giving the emphasis for the appropriate actions for the water resource management. And even they are start emphasis on enhancing the institution capabilities and creating the awareness at the mass levels. But but one problem is that Since 1960 or 70s, we are unable to make the new dams or to restore the water. So that's why our water channels are decreasing. And then there are other successful initiatives by the Punjab government and the other provincial government, clean drinking water, clean clean filtration plants at the residential areas and other things. So basically now we need to address these issues at the individual state and country level. At the individual level, household and industry should think about that. How could they use the water effectively? And even the agriculture and industrial sector should also run the public educational campaigns that how could we use or how could we manage the water. And we need more national drinking water policies and action change policies to promote the efficient use of water, building the water storages, building the dams, and managing the resources according to our growing population. So what are the water use policies in Pakistan according to the draft of the climate change policy or national water policy 2015? Our latest draft have some recommendations that it also giving the framework for the water resource management, and it is also emphasis on the guidelines that Pakistan Meteorological and other departments or agencies should be encouraged and supporting in the research work that how could we make sustainable plans for the water storages, and how could agriculture and industrial sector could play important role in water storage facilities, and in the drought prone areas what could be the policies and how could we store the available groundwater resources so that it could be used in the later time or the later months when there are less rainfall or other sources of water. So these are the policies, and we need to think or implement these policies very effectively to solve the water crisis in Pakistan. So policy and the future of the Pakistani food security. So now we will talk about that. How could we ensure that Pakistan could be among those countries which are securing their food for their future generations. So in 2018, Pakistan has started their first food security policies. And basically the main purpose of this policy is to elevate the poverty and to less the hunger and the promote sustainable food production for the future generations. And basically, this initiative is also focusing on the SDG 2, that is Zero Hunger Program. And the policy draft is really good, but now we need to win the trust from the provincial governments, because federal government could not do alone unless and unless the provincial governments are ready to translate the policy into the practical actions, because the implementation is the most important. And even the government has pledged to allocate 18 million rupees towards the initiative, and even the IMF is also giving the funds to aggregate the hunger and the poverty in Pakistan. So but the main achievement from the government is that they should spend freely on the poor and the food security, and they should be very serious about the food sustainable programs, and there should not be the internal or external pressures on the government not to implement this program. And what other steps a government could take, especially in the agricultural sector? They should reduce the prices of the fertilizers, because most of the farmers debate that due to the high prices of fertilizers, their crops are very expensive in the market and they could not meet the needs of the growing population. And they should ensure that the seeds and the fertilizer should be available according to the requirement of each crop. And there should be a proper mechanism system to control the prices of the crops, fruits, and vegetables in the market. And government also facilitate the farmers working on the barren land. Then how could they help in making it more sustainable? And they should also start working on the irrigation schemes. Of course, if the farmers would get the uh, good water irrigation schemes, they would produce more crops, and this our food insecurity will be much less or low um, than the previous year. So these are some recommendations for the government what we need to do to improve this issue.
And finally, in this last lecture for today, Eram Khan will talk you through creating green schoolyards and how important it is.
Creating green schoolyards. This is a very important topic, and I would like all the educators, teachers, and especially the coordinators and principals of the school to focus on this important component and element of our education. It should come under our curriculum, but if it's not, you can plan out for your own school. We can help you out in designing the whole program. So, Green Schoolyard is a project of World Climate School Norway and SDG Academy Pakistan with a mission to inspire cities to be greener and more sustainable. Secondly, it will provide our schools with the resources they would need to develop a green schoolyard project from start to finish. Thirdly, green schoolyards bring nature back to city children and suburbs by transforming barren spots and ordinary grass into vibrant environments for learning and play, set within the context of the rich local ecosystems that nurture wildlife and the natural processes that underlie and sustain our urban infrastructure. Now let's see how this whole project of creating green schoolyard will help children. There are many ways it can help. Number one, we can provide an access to nature. For example, daily nature access. It will provide every child in every city with high quality access to nearby nature on daily basis. Second, balance between a theory and a hand-on experience. Daily access to nature on school grounds helps to balance the real world sensory experiences a child should go with our increasingly digital world. Third, sense of place. Green schoolyards built with local natural materials and native plants are each unique, reflecting the geography, ecology and culture of their community and building a sense of place for children and adults who spend time in them. Secondly, the Green Schoolyard project can provide ecological infrastructure repair in which children will learn to save their environment by little activities in which teachers and educators will engage them. Thirdly, improved learning environment. When we talk about that we are coming up with a project of Green Schoolyard, we are saying that we are also providing an improved learning environment for children in few different ways. For example, educational attainment. Studies have shown that children learn better with hands-on experiences in the types of outdoor settings like Green Schoolyard. Number second, improved teacher satisfaction. Outdoor teacher training environments are also appreciated by teachers who benefit from abundant teaching resources, conveniently located near their classrooms, and the variety and diversity of experiences found in nature. Thirdly, Reduced bullying. Many experiments have shown that green schoolyard projects promote imaginative play and provide variety and diversity in children's social and play environments, reducing boredom, shifting social leadership structures, and leading to fewer disciplinary problems such as playground bullying. This is a very important factor, and you guys should be focusing on this. Number 4 is health and well-being. How to create more healthy children in our society, not only in physical ways but also emotional, social, intellectual and spiritual. Number 5, community engagement. By creating this kind of green schoolyard, we are inviting our children to engage with their community programs.
Now we have reached the end of Module 2, Consequences of Climate Change. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I also hope you have become inspired to learn more. We have a list of assignments for you this week. You will find it in the description under the video. From this assignment, you will learn a lot from just following the links we offer for this homework. The themes are the following: the third pole, rural water harvesting, water management, heat reduction checklist, sustainable development goals, and Doughnut Economics. Now, thank you very much for your attention and patience today. I wish you all the best. Looking forward to seeing you all in the next module.